My sister's lawyer was the first person to look up when I walked through the courtroom doors. Then the court reporter. Then, slowly, the people in the gallery behind the bar. I wasn't looking at any of them. I was carrying a file folder and a laptop case, and walking the way the bureau had trained me to walk in federal courtrooms, steady, purposeful, without hesitation. My credentials were clipped to my jacket lapel. The blue letters across the back of my vest said what I had spent 11 years becoming. I didn't look toward the gallery until I reached the prosecution table. That's when I saw them. My father sat in the third row, wearing the same gray sport coat he'd worn to my high school graduation. My mother was beside him, her hands folded in her lap the way they always were when she was trying not to show that she was nervous. They hadn't noticed me yet. Their eyes were fixed on the defendant's table on my older sister Amber, who sat very still in a dark blazer with her hands folded in front of her. Then my father shifted in his seat, that small, restless movement I had known since childhood, and his eyes found mine. He went completely still. My mother looked up a half-second later. Her mouth opened, then closed without making a sound. Amber turned at the change in the room's energy. When she saw me standing at the prosecution table in full federal credentials, something drained out of her face. Not surprise exactly, more like the slow exhale of a tire that has been losing air for years and finally goes flat. I had not spoken to my family in 11 years, and the lie that had taken those years from us was about to be read aloud in a federal courtroom. I grew up in Cookeville, Tennessee, which is the kind of place people either love fiercely or leave quietly. It sits on the Cumberland Plateau, about an hour east of Nashville, with rolling hills and a main street that still has a hardware store and a diner that has been in the same family since 1967. My father, Dale Henderson, ran an auto repair shop 2 blocks off the square. He was a big, quiet man who believed in 3 things without much negotiation: honest work, church on Sunday, and keeping your word. My mother, Susan, was a school librarian. She read to children every Tuesday morning in a corner decorated with handmade paper stars, and she knew the name of every kid who walked through those doors. She was soft-spoken but not soft. She had the kind of steadiness that made people trust her without quite knowing why. My older sister Amber was 3 years ahead of me in school. By the time I was in middle school, she had already become the version of a daughter that small towns recognize on sight. Student council, church choir, dating Kevin Marsh, who everyone knew would eventually marry her. She was kind and easy to be around, and she made my parents' lives feel like they were going according to some quiet plan. I was different. Not in a troubled way, not in a way that worried anyone. I was just more directed. Where Amber gathered people, I set goals. I ran cross-country. I read case files the way other teenagers read magazines. By the time I was 16, I knew I wanted the FBI. Not because I watched too many crime shows, because I understood, even then, that financial systems could be weaponized against ordinary people. I had watched a family we knew lose their savings to a contractor who defrauded them. I had watched my father spend 6 months untangling a supplier who had falsified billing records. The law had teeth, but you needed people willing to use them. I told my parents over dinner my junior year of high school. My mother got very quiet. My father looked at me the way he looked at engines he hadn't encountered before carefully, with genuine interest. "The FBI," he said. "Yes, sir," he nodded slowly. "That's a serious path." "I know. I want it." Amber, across the table, smiled at me. "That's so cool," she said. She meant it. At the time, 4 years later, I graduated from Tennessee Tech with a degree in criminal justice and a near-perfect GPA. The acceptance letter to the bureau came on a Thursday afternoon in October. My mother cried. My father shook my hand and then pulled me into a hug, which he did not do often. Amber hugged me too, and said she was proud of me. 6 weeks later, I drove to Quantico, Virginia. What I didn't know then was that something had shifted in my sister the week after I left. Training at Quantico is consuming. Communication is limited during the early weeks. I called home when I could. My mother answered most times. My father occasionally. Amber, twice. Somewhere around week 8, the calls stopped connecting. I left messages. Nothing came back. I told myself it was probably a billing issue or the holidays or everyone simply being busy. I tried not to worry. The training demanded everything I had. Then one evening I reached my mother. Her voice was different. Careful in the way voices get when someone has already decided what they're going to say. "Mom," I said, "is everything okay?" There was a pause. "We heard about what happened," she said. I had no idea what she meant. "What happened?" "With your training," she said quietly. "Amber told us." My stomach dropped. I stood very still in the hallway of the barracks. "Mom, nothing happened. I'm in week 8. I'm doing fine." She said, "They told you to leave." I felt the floor shift under my feet. "That is not true," I said slowly. "I am standing in Quantico right now. I have not been asked to leave anything. Claire." Her voice went soft in a way that sounded like a door easing shut. "Amber wouldn't make something like that up." And there it was, the sentence that would cost me 11 years. I tried again. I gave her the number for the FBI recruiting office. I told her to look up my training cohort, to call and ask anyone. I stayed on the phone for 20 minutes, explaining as carefully as I knew how that nothing she had heard was accurate. When I stopped talking, there was a long silence. Then my mother said, "Your father is very upset." The call ended soon after. I want to be honest about what I did next, because I've turned it over many times since. I called back the following week. My father answered. His voice was cold in a way I had never heard from him before. He said he thought I needed to stop pretending and just come home. I tried to explain again. He said Amber had no reason to lie. The call ended. 2 months later, I drove to Cookville during a training break. I pulled up to the house on Millbrook Road and knocked on the front door without warning. My mother opened it halfway. She looked at me for a long moment without speaking. "Mom, I'm here. I'm in training. I'm fine." She glanced past me toward the street. Then she said, "Amber said you'd do this." "Do what?" "Show up with a story." Her voice was tired. "We love you, Claire, but we need you to stop." "Can I come in?" "Your father doesn't want to argue." "I'm not here to argue. I'm here to tell you the truth." She started to close the door. I put my hand gently against the frame. "Please," I said. She looked at me, then really looked, and for a moment I thought I saw something flicker behind her eyes. A question. A crack in something. But whatever it was, it didn't survive. The door closed. I stood on that porch for a long time. The wind moved through the oak tree in the front yard. The same oak Amber and I had climbed when we were small. I got back in my car. I drove back to Virginia, and I made a decision I have carried ever since. I would not beg to be believed. I had the truth. I would build a life around it, and let that truth speak eventually, in its own time, on its own terms. I also decided I would not disappear completely. Every Christmas, I mailed a card. Every year, without exception, even when the silence stretched so long it felt like shouting into empty space. I graduated from Quantico the following spring. My name was in the program. My credentials were real. My parents were not there. My first field office assignment was in Charlotte, North Carolina, Financial Crimes Division. The work suited me in a way that was hard to explain to people outside it. The patience required to trace money through shell companies and falsified invoices, the quiet satisfaction of watching a complicated pattern resolve into something that could be proven beyond a reasonable doubt. I was good at it, and being good at it was enough for a long time. I also met Marcus. Marcus Webb was assigned to the cyber division in the same Charlotte office. He was careful and dry-humored in a way that revealed itself slowly, one observation at a time. We worked adjacent cases for 3 months before we had a real conversation. That conversation happened over bad coffee at 8 in the evening when most of the office had gone home. He slid a mug toward me across the break room counter. "You look like someone handed you a corrupted hard drive," he said. I laughed, despite myself. Just a long day. That was the beginning. Marcus never pushed about my family. When I told him in pieces, over many months he listened without trying to fix it. He understood the particular exhaustion of carrying something you can't fully explain to people who haven't lived it. He had his own version of complicated family, and he never made me feel like mine was worse or better or more dramatic than it needed to be. He just accepted it as part of who I was. We dated for 2 years. He asked me to marry him on a hiking trail outside Asheville. I said yes before he finished the question. We got married at a small outdoor ceremony near Charlotte. About 30 people, mostly colleagues, a few close friends from college. I mailed an invitation to Cookville. I don't know whether anyone opened it. Our daughter Lily was born 2 years later. She had Marcus's calm and my stubbornness in roughly equal measure, which made for a very determined 3-year-old. The first time she looked up at me with those serious dark eyes and said my name, Something rearranged inside me that has never gone back to where it was. I sent a photograph to Cookville with a short letter. 3 sentences. You have a granddaughter. She was born healthy. Her name is Lily. No response. By my 10th year in the Bureau, I was a senior special agent in the Nashville field office, leading a unit that handled complex financial fraud cases across the southeastern region. The work had grown with me, schemes that crossed state lines, fraud that affected hundreds of ordinary people, cases that required years to build carefully before they were ready. Lily was 7. She was in 2nd grade and had recently decided she wanted to be either a paleontologist or a veterinarian, and she was keeping both options open with the seriousness of someone who understood that these were not trivial decisions. Marcus had transferred to the Nashville office when I did, and we had found our rhythm as 2 people who understood what the job asked of you without having to explain it. The case file came to my desk on a Tuesday morning in February. It started as a referral from a state insurance commission investigation that had grown beyond their jurisdiction. The scheme was methodical. False damage claims, fabricated contractor invoices, duplicate billing across multiple properties. The kind of fraud that requires someone who understands insurance systems from the inside and has the patience to be careful about it. I opened the primary subjects file without expecting anything unusual. The name stopped me completely. Amber Christine Marsh, née Henderson. I read the address, Cookville, Tennessee. I checked the date of birth. I looked at the file photograph. My sister. I sat at my desk for a long time without moving. The office continued around me, keyboards, a phone ringing down the hall, someone laughing near the coffee station. None of it registered. On my screen was 11 years of silence reduced to a case number and a birth date I had memorized before I could drive. My supervising agent, Karen Ohl, had spent enough years running complicated operations to know when something needed to be said carefully. She called me into her office that afternoon and slid the referral sheet across her desk without preamble. You've seen this. I have. She studied my face. Henderson is your maiden name. Yes. She folded her hands. I can assign it to another team. No explanation required. I thought about that for a moment. Part of me wanted to step away entirely. 11 years. A closed door. The version of my sister who had watched me leave for Quantico and somewhere along the way decided that my accomplishments were something to be quietly dismantled. But the part of me the Bureau had trained for a decade understood something clearly. Walking away wouldn't undo the case. The evidence was the evidence. Someone would present it regardless, and I had spent 11 years believing that the truth was worth showing up for. I can handle it, I said. Karen looked at me a moment longer than usual. Your parents will likely attend the arraignment. That landed differently than anything else she had said. My parents. In the same room. I understand, I said. The week before the arraignment was quiet on the surface. Lily had a science fair project due, and Marcus helped her build a model of the water cycle out of materials that left our kitchen looking like it had been through its own weather system. Dinner conversation was about evaporation and condensation. I was grateful for every minute of it. One evening after Lily was in bed, Marcus sat beside me on the back deck. You've been somewhere else all week, he said. I know. Is it the case or the people in it? Both, I said honestly. He was quiet for a moment. Then, have you thought about what you'll say to them? No, because there's nothing to say before the courtroom. Whatever happens needs to happen there first. He nodded. That made sense to him. I thought about my sister, Amber, who had sung in the choir. Amber, who had hugged me the day my acceptance letter came. I had spent 11 years turning the question of why over in my mind without ever landing on a clean answer. The closest I had come was this. Some people shrink when the people they love grow, not because they are entirely bad, but because something inside them decides there is not enough light to go around, and they reach for the nearest switch. The morning of the arraignment, I was awake before sunrise. Old habit by now. I dressed carefully in the dark. Pressed slacks, bureau jacket, credentials clipped to the lapel. The same routine I had followed for every significant day in my career. Lily was still asleep. I stood in the doorway of her room for a moment before I left, watching the rise and fall of her breathing. The small fist curled against her pillow. Marcus touched my shoulder in the kitchen. You ready? I picked up my case files from the counter. Getting there, I said. The federal courthouse in Nashville is a serious building. Marble floors, high ceilings, the particular quiet that settles over places where consequences are decided. I arrived 30 minutes early, went through the side entrance, reviewed the evidence summary with the assistant U.S. attorney before proceedings began. I was thinking about the transaction chart I needed to display in the second exhibit sequence when I walked through the main courtroom doors. I reached the prosecution table, set down my files. Then I turned. My father was in the third row, gray sport coat. He was older than I had been prepared for, his hair fully silver now, his shoulders carrying the subtle roundness of a man who had worked with his hands for 30 years and felt every year of it. My mother sat beside him in a blue cardigan, smaller than I remembered, her hands still in her lap exactly the way they always were when she was trying not to show she was nervous. They hadn't found me yet. Their eyes were on Amber at the defendant's table. My sister sat very still in a dark blazer, 41 years old. She looked it not harshly, but in the specific way of someone who had been carrying something heavy for a long time and had let it settle into her face. Then my mother's eyes swept the front of the room and found mine. She made a sound. Not a word. Just a sound, a sharp intake of breath that made my father turn. He looked at me for a long moment, his hands pressed flat against his thighs the way they did when he was working to stay composed. The credentials on my lapel said everything before either of us could speak. 11 years of casework and late nights and decisions that carried real weight, all of it visible in a badge and a bureau jacket, and the simple fact that I was standing on the right side of the bar in a federal courtroom. I turned back to the prosecution table. The bailiff called the room to order. The judge entered. The arraignment began. The facts came out in the careful, procedural language federal proceedings require. Amber and her husband Kevin had filed fraudulent insurance claims across a 4-year period, covering 14 properties, fabricated contractor invoices, staged damage photographs, in several cases, simultaneous claims with multiple insurers for the same incident. The total came to just under $900,000. The assistant U.S. attorney presented the overview. I presented the financial evidence, transaction records, invoice comparisons, the pattern analysis that had connected the scheme across state lines. I spoke the way the Bureau trained you to speak in courtrooms, clearly, without inflection, letting the facts carry the weight that the facts carry on their own when you let them. From the edge of my vision, I could see my parents watching me. Not the evidence boards, me. My mother's expression had settled somewhere I couldn't quite read from a distance. My father sat very straight, the way he always sat when something required his full attention, and he intended to give it completely. Kevin Marsh stared at the table in front of him. Amber looked at me once. Her eyes held mine for a moment, not defiantly, not with anger, and then dropped away. During the brief recess, I remained at the prosecution table to review notes. When I stood and moved toward the hallway, my parents were already there. We stood about 6 feet apart. For a moment, nobody moved. My mother spoke first. Claire. Her voice was so careful, like she was testing the word to make sure it still worked. Mom, I said. She looked at the credentials, the jacket, my face. She stopped, started again. You're with the FBI. I am. My father's eyes moved slowly across the badge, the lapel pin, the jacket. His jaw worked once before he spoke. How long? He asked. 11 years, I said. He absorbed that the way he absorbed information that required recalibration slowly, thoroughly, like an engine reading he hadn't expected. We heard you washed out, he said quietly. We were told you couldn't finish. I know what you were told, I said. I kept my voice level. I tried to tell you otherwise. Several times. My mother put her hand briefly over her mouth. I know you did, she said. I know. She looked older than I had been prepared for. Not fragile, but tired in a specific way. The tiredness of someone who has been holding a version of events together for a long time and has just watched it come apart. When the recess ended and everyone returned to the courtroom, I noticed something had shifted in the way my parents watched the proceedings. Earlier, they had been watching for their daughter at the defendant's table. Now they were watching both of us, the one at the defense table and the one at the prosecution table, and trying to reconcile the story they had believed with the room they were sitting in. After the session closed for the day and Amber's attorney entered a not guilty plea, the courtroom emptied in the measured way courtrooms do. I packed my folder carefully and stepped into the hallway. My parents were waiting near the bench where my mother had been sitting earlier. They stood slightly apart from each other, the way people do when they're both carrying something and aren't sure yet whether to set it down. Amber came through the hall a moment later with Kevin on one side and her attorney on the other. Kevin kept walking. The attorney paused a few feet away to give the moment its space. Amber looked at our parents, then at me. For a while, nobody said anything. Then my mother said very quietly, "Amber, why?" My sister pressed her lips together. She looked at the floor. Then at my credentials. Then at my face. When she finally spoke, her voice was flat and honest in the way voices get when defenses are no longer available. "I expected it to feel like something," she said. When I told them, I thought it would feel like she paused, searching for the right word, like evening something out. "What do you mean?" my mother said. Amber exhaled slowly. "When you got in," she said, looking at me, "that was all anyone talked about. At church. At the diner. Everywhere we went." She repeated the words in a flat, hollow way. "Dale Henderson's daughter is going to be an FBI agent." She shook her head slightly. "Kevin and I had just gotten engaged. Nobody cared about that. You were all anyone wanted to talk about. We were proud of you," my mother said softly. "I know you were." Amber's voice didn't waver. "That was sort of the problem." She looked at me directly. "You were always the one going somewhere," she said. "I was the one who stayed. For a long time I thought I'd made peace with that." She paused. "I hadn't. I waited. I told them you washed out because I thought it would just be temporary," she said. "I thought you'd call again and they'd figure it out on their own." She looked at the floor again. "But you stopped calling." "I called 3 times, I said. "Your mother told me you'd warned her I would show up with a story. Your father said you had no reason to lie." Amber was quiet. "I drove to the house," I said. "I stood on the porch. Your mother closed the door." She nodded once. "I know. You knew they had closed the door on me," I said, "and you let it stay closed." She nodded again. "Yes." I let that sit for a moment without filling it. "Why didn't you fix it?" I asked. Not in anger. I genuinely wanted to understand. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "Because fixing it would have meant admitting what I'd done. And every year it didn't get fixed. It got harder to imagine fixing it." She finally met my eyes. I kept telling myself there would be a better time. Our father had been standing very still through all of it. He turned toward Amber now, slowly. 11 years, he said. Her name came out the way a familiar word does when the world around it has just rearranged itself. She nodded. He looked toward the window at the end of the hallway. Then back at me. "I should have called the bureau the day your mother told me," he said. I should have picked up the phone and asked. "Yes," I said gently. "You should have." He absorbed that without flinching. He had the expression of a man doing an honest accounting of something he had been avoiding for a long time. "We have your Christmas cards," my mother said then. I looked at her. Her voice shook slightly. "All of them. Your father kept them in the top drawer of the filing cabinet in his office. Every one you sent." I looked at my father. He cleared his throat once. "I didn't know how to answer them," he said. After a while, answering would have meant explaining why I hadn't answered sooner. He shook his head slowly. "That's not an excuse. It's just what happened." "I know something about how long the truth takes to find its way out," I said. My mother wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. The small gesture was so familiar she had done it the same way at every church funeral and every school graduation. I could remember that something shifted quietly in my chest. 4 months later, Amber and Kevin accepted a plea agreement. Full restitution, supervised probation, community service, a federal conviction on their records. No prison, but the kind of weight that doesn't lift. I was not in the courtroom for the plea. The case had transitioned to other hands by then. I had done what the bureau needed, and stepped back when it was time. I was in my office reviewing a new referral when my phone lit up on my desk. A text from a number I had only recently added back to my contacts. "My mother. Would it be all right if we came to visit sometime? We would like to meet Lily." I read it twice, set the phone down, picked it up again. Then I typed back, "Saturday works." They pulled into our driveway in my father's blue pickup truck in the early afternoon. Lily was in the backyard kicking a soccer ball against the fence with complete concentration. Marcus was on the deck with the grill going. I watched my parents step out of the truck from the kitchen window. My father moved more slowly than I remembered. My mother stood for a moment just looking at the house before she started walking. I met them on the front steps. We didn't hug right away. We stood there for a moment, which felt like the honest thing to do. Then my mother said, "You have a beautiful home. Thank you." From around the side of the house came the sound of a ball hitting the fence. Then Lily's voice carrying over the yard. "Mom, the latch is sticking again." My mother looked toward the sound. "Is that her?" "That's her," I said. A moment later, Lily appeared from around the corner, still carrying the ball. She stopped and assessed the two strangers on the front steps with the frank efficiency of a 7-year-old conducting a quick evaluation. "Are you my grandparents?" she asked. My mother made a small, involuntary sound. "Yes," my father said. His voice was careful and quiet. "I'm your grandpa." Lily tilted her head and considered this for a moment. Then she held out the soccer ball toward him. "Okay. Do you know how to play?" My father blinked. He looked at the ball, then at me, then back at Lily. "I used to," he said. "Good enough," Lily said, and she turned and walked back toward the yard, clearly assuming he would follow. He looked at me. Something in his face had broken open in the way certain things do quietly, without announcement, without any particular drama. "Go ahead," I said. He went. My mother stood beside me. We listened to Lily's voice from the backyard, already explaining to my father in great detail the specific rules she had decided applied to this particular game. From the deck, Marcus called out, "Burgers in 10. That's a firm deadline." My mother laughed. I hadn't heard that sound in 11 years. It landed somewhere deep and complicated in my chest, in a place I hadn't realized was still waiting for it. We went inside. 6 months after that, the Nashville field office held its annual commendation ceremony. I received a recognition for the Marsh case and 2 others that year. Routine procedure, a modest room, a few brief remarks, nothing particularly dramatic about it. Marcus stood beside me. Lily sat in the front row and was conducting a quiet, private debate with herself about whether the ceiling tiles were exactly square. In the row behind her sat 2 people who had not been at any ceremony before. My father sat very straight, the way he sat when something mattered. My mother had brought a small camera. When my name was called and I stepped forward, my father stood up. Nobody asked him to. He just stood. My mother stood too, and Marcus, and Lily, though Lily looked briefly uncertain about why everyone was standing and decided to clap loudly as a reasonable precaution. Afterward, my father took my hand in both of his, the same way he had the day my acceptance letter arrived. "I'm proud of you," he said. He had written those words once, in a letter, years ago, back when things were still simple between us. Hearing them now, on the other side of everything that had happened, felt different, heavier and lighter at the same time, like something that had been stored under pressure for a very long time, finally released. That evening, after Marcus had taken Lily home and the last of the guests had said their goodbyes, I sat alone on the steps outside the building for a few minutes. The night was cool. Nashville moved quietly a few blocks away. People ask sometimes whether I'm angry about the 11 years. I've thought about the honest answer long enough to trust it. No. Anger is expensive, and I had other things to spend my energy on. What I think about instead is the simpler question underneath the one people are really asking. How does a family lose 11 years over something like this? Slowly, is the answer. And with help from everyone involved. My sister planted something. My parents let it take root because questioning it would have meant admitting they might be wrong about someone they trusted completely. And I stayed away longer than necessary because I was waiting for someone else to open a door I could have pushed harder to open myself. We all had our version of pride. We all had our version of the story we found easier to live with than to challenge. The lie didn't survive 11 years because it was convincing. It survived because everyone, in their own way, made it easier to believe than to question. What I took from all of it, what I carry into my work and into my home and into the way I try to raise my daughter is something simple. The truth doesn't always arrive on schedule, but if you build your life honestly, and you keep sending the letters even when they go unanswered, there usually comes a morning when a door opens that you had stopped expecting to open. And sometimes what's behind it is a 7-year-old handing your father a soccer ball and informing him that he'll need to keep up. That's enough. More than enough. If this story stayed with you, I want to ask you one thing. Think of the person in your life you've been meaning to call, the one where something got complicated and you both just stopped. Pick up the phone. Ask the extra question. Listen a little longer than feels comfortable. You might be surprised what's still on the other side of that silence. Thank you for being here with me today.